What would you do if your career, your reputation, everything you worked for was threatened by a backstabbing boss? Most people just quit. I chose a different path. Sweet, calculated revenge. Join me as I pull back the curtain on the strategic maneuvers and the surprising conclusion of how I reclaimed my power and watched their treachery become my ultimate triumph. It all started in what I thought was my dream job. I was climbing the ladder in a high-stakes corporate world, and I had a boss who I looked up to as a mentor. I trusted them completely. I gave them my loyalty, my best ideas, and my relentless hard work. We were a team, or so I thought. The turning point was subtle at first. An idea I pitched in a private meeting suddenly became their brilliant insight in a presentation to executives. Then, a project I led to success was credited solely to their visionary leadership. Soon, it became a pattern. My contributions were erased, my projects were undermined behind my back, and I started hearing whispers, little lies about my performance, my commitment. The trust I had was shattered. It was replaced by this cold, sinking feeling of betrayal. I felt humiliated, angry, and completely powerless. Every morning, walking into that office felt like walking into a war zone where I was the only one who did know the battle had already started. The initial shock turned into a slow-burning rage. I could have just updated my resume, found another job, and walked away. But the thought of them getting away with it, of them continuing to climb the ladder on the backs of others, was something I couldn't stomach. I decided I wouldn't just leave. I would make them understand the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. So, the game began. While I kept up appearances, smiling in meetings, and delivering my work flawlessly, my evenings became dedicated to strategic reconnaissance. I started a deep dive not into company files, but into the boss themselves. I became a student of their habits, their weaknesses, their insecurities. I observed who they relied on, what reports they couldn't function without, and which deadlines caused them the most stress. I started a private encrypted document. In it, I meticulously logged every instance of their misconduct, complete with dates, times, and verifiable details. The stolen credit for the Q3 marketing campaign documented. The lie they told about my numbers to the regional director documented with the email chain to prove it. I was building a case, not for a courtroom, but for the court of corporate opinion. I discovered their biggest vulnerability, a complete reliance on a complex weekly analytics report that they didn't actually understand, but used to justify all their decisions to upper management. They just read the summary I prepared. That was my leverage. With my intelligence gathered and my leverage identified, it was time to launch the covert operation. Phase 1 was all about introducing subtle chaos. Small, untraceable glitches began to appear. A crucial file would be corrupted just before a big meeting, forcing them to improvise and expose their lack of knowledge. Data points in their favorite report would be slightly, almost unnoticeably, off, not enough to be an obvious error, but enough to make their projections seem consistently over-optimistic when the real numbers came in. These weren't lies, they were just inconvenient truths presented without the usual filter. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Their confidence started to crack. They became paranoid, irritable, and their performance began to slip. Then came phase 2, weaponizing information. I had my documented case of their unethical behavior. I didn't send a mass email or go to HR with a dramatic confrontation. That would have been messy and could have backfired. Instead, I used surgical precision. I knew a senior manager in another department was frustrated with my boss's lone wolf approach. During a casual coffee chat, I might mention, it was a tough quarter. I'm glad my original projections for the X project were conservative. Even if the final presentation showed a more ambitious target, I was planting seeds of doubt, all based on truth. I'd forward an old email chain to a trusted colleague in a related team, asking a seemingly innocent question. knowing it would highlight how my original successful strategy was ignored. It was a campaign of truth, delivered strategically to the right people at the right time. The grand crescendo, Phase 3, was simpler than I could have imagined. My boss was set to give the most important presentation of the year to the entire senior leadership team, including the CEO, a few days before. I accidentally overwrote the presentation template on the shared drive with a new, much more complex one. Then, I called in sick on the day they were desperately trying to put it all together, and that critical weekly report they relied on. I submitted the raw data as requested, but without my usual executive summary. I just followed the process. They were left with a mountain of raw data they couldn't interpret, a presentation template they couldn't use, and no one to bail them out. They had to face the leadership team completely unprepared. Their incompetence, their reliance on others was laid bare for everyone to see. There was no hiding. The fallout was like watching a slow-motion demolition. The disastrous presentation triggered a review of their department's performance. My strategically leaked information provided context for their failures. The small glitches were now seen as a pattern of incompetence. An internal investigation began. My meticulously documented file became an anonymous tip to the ethics committee. The dominoes fell one by one. Their reputation crumbled. Key allies distanced themselves. Projects were reassigned. Within a few months, there was a corporate restructuring and their position was eliminated. They were escorted out of the building with a small box of their belongings. As for me, I navigated the aftermath carefully. I never gloated. When asked, I simply presented the facts of my work, letting the quality speak for itself. The truths I had shared began to form a new narrative. People saw me not as a disgruntled employee, but as a competent professional who had been sidelined. My name was cleared, and my reputation was restored, even strengthened. I was soon promoted, taking on a leadership role where I could build the kind of team I always wanted one, based on trust, collaboration, and genuine respect. Looking back, this whole ordeal was a brutal but invaluable lesson. It taught me the dark side of ambition, but also the power of strategic thinking and quiet resilience. I walked a fine line between justice and revenge, and I'll be honest, it was a difficult path. But my goal was never just to tear someone down. It was to stop a toxic person from harming others and to reclaim my own professional dignity. This experience fundamentally changed my leadership philosophy. I now prioritize transparency and giving credit where it's due above all else. For anyone out there in a toxic work environment, know that you have more power than you think. Document everything. Build alliances. Understand the system you're in. Sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest impact. You don't always have to just walk away. Sometimes you can stand your ground and rewrite the ending. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories on navigating the corporate jungle.